One of the foundational concepts of Alcoholics Anonymous is that all progress starts by telling the truth. It turns out that we as people have a very hard time receiving the truth from other people in the terms of feedback. We also have a very hard time telling the truth to ourselves. In psychology, motivation is often camped into one of two categories. Either you have an approach mindset where you're approaching something you want, or you have an avoid mindset where you're avoiding something you don't want. And as people, we often develop an avoidance mindset. We avoid hard truths. We avoid getting to the heart of the matter. We avoid focusing on our work, and instead we continue to avoid the hard truths. We avoid what we don't want to deal with. We avoid fear. And we avoid our past in a lot of ways because we don't want to deal with the pain that our former selves handled. The more you develop an approach mindset where rather than avoiding pain or fear, you just simply want to grow, evolve, change, develop, get clarity. Having an approach mindset takes commitment. It takes courage. It also is the recognition that you can transform anything. You can transform a perspective. You can transform your current confusion. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to get immediate clarity, specifically how to be a lot more honest with yourself and how to get better angles. Hey, how's it going? Dr. Benjamin Hardy here, author of Be Your Future Self Now. Just a quick interruption to your YouTube video to invite you to go to futureself.com, where you can immediately download the one-page Future Self cheat sheet and the full Future Self course, as well as other amazing goodies. These will blow your mind. Go to futureself.com. Now back to your YouTube video. There's a great quote from Stephen R. Covey where he says, "We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are." It's important to realize, though, that who you are right now is very temporary. Dr. Daniel Gilbert, the Harvard psychologist, said that who you are right now is as temporary and fleeting as the present moment. Who you are right now is different from who you were a week ago, and it's different from who you'll be in a week. But if you tightly cling to what you think is true, basically if you're psychologically rigid, where you're unwilling to be honest with yourself, unwilling to get new angles. So there's two key concepts here. One is called psychological flexibility, which is the ability to clarify and be healthy and be emotional, but also to see yourself as a context. You see yourself as a context rather than content. Rather than overly focusing on the micro, you actually focus on the macro. You change the content. Just like you can rearrange a house, you can get new perspectives, new angles. You can change who you are. You can change your identity. You can change your perspective. You can change your goals. And then that changes what your behaviors are and what they mean. If you change your identity, then a lot of the behaviors or friends or situations that you're dealing with stop being appealing. Rather than micro-focusing on the content, such as, oh, I've got this situation, if you focus on the macro, which is the context, and continually view the situation from different angles, view yourself from different angles, then you can start to transform yourself and start to transform your situation. Things that used to be a big deal stop being a big deal. But also there's a concept called mental complexity. This comes from a psychologist named Robert Keegan, Harvard psychologist. And one of the things he talks about is that the goal is to be able to see things from different angles, even different angles than your own. Many people, they never actually can see outside their worldview. Yes, we all have a perception. We all have a view. Remember, quote from Stephen Covey, you don't see the world as it is, but as you are. But as you become more mentally complex, as Keegan would say, you can actually step outside your worldview and analyze it. And you can get new and different angles, such as other people's opinions or perspectives, and you can be open to those. And you can start to see holes in your own worldview. You can start to see where you've got things a little wrong, where you've got some blind spots, where you're ignorant, because we all are ignorant. We all have tons of blind spots in our own views. But if you're unable to be honest with yourself, and if you're unable to take alternative perspectives, so first off, we have a hard time being honest with ourselves, but then we have a hard time receiving feedback or honesty from other people because we're too emotionally sensitive, which is psychologically rigid. When you become emotionally flexible and you see yourself as context rather than content, then you don't overly obsess on the content. Yes, maybe you've got weaknesses. Yes, maybe there's problems going on, but you're not that worried about that because you know things can change. Who you are right now in the present moment is as fleeting as the present moment. And there's another great concept and great quote here that it's more powerful to optimize for where you are in 10 years from now than where you are from 10 days from now. 10 days from now doesn't really matter. It's okay if right now there's a lot up in the air. It's okay right now if you're not fully clear on everything. But if you want to get clear, then there's two massive things you can do. One is extreme honesty journaling, which is writing down bullets. I love the idea of writing bullets down of everything that's going on in your life, everything that you're struggling with, decisions you're trying to make, habits you're considering, and considering all angles and getting all angles. Start with yourself. So you can journal, you can go on walks and stuff like that, but you want to give yourself time to just be as blunt and honest with yourself as possible without being so emotional about it. Just look at it Just write it down. Here's what I'm dealing with. Here's what's going on. Here's the situation. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what I'm questioning. And just be as blunt and honest as possible. If there's a decision you're trying to make, here's all the reasons why I'm not sure about it. Here's why. Just get it out of your head. By simply getting it out of your head and putting it on paper, you're now turning it into a narrative. You're now turning it into a story so that it's not muddled thought and emotion. You're actually contextualizing it into a situation. And you can deal with situations. You can't deal with muddled thoughts. And so just by simply putting it on paper, your thinking will get a lot clearer. And then you can start to be honest with yourself. And then you can start to talk to people about it and get other people's perspectives and just share with them what you're dealing with, what you're handling. Get multiple angles. As an example, I find that when I talk to my wife about certain things and I can just express with clarity because I've put it on paper what I'm trying to figure out, what I'm trying to do, I can get some really good angles on it. Then I can digest it. By the way, it's really important to see your past and your future as a draft. You're constantly redrafting. This is something that's really helpful as a writer, as you can take an idea and you can turn it from an idea into a really crappy draft. And they say that writing isn't really about the initial draft, it's really about the rewriting. It's about taking the initial idea and iterating. And even Naval Ravikant said that becoming an outlier is not about 10,000 hours, it's about 10,000 iterations. So the nice part is realizing you can take a really bad draft. And even, I think Stephen King said it or someone, that all the way up until like the very end, a book is a piece of trash, honestly. And I can say this. I've written multiple books. Here's 2 of the books I've written, but I've written 8 books. And I can tell you that the book is trash almost until the very end. But then you really are doing iteration, and cleaning it and sculpting it, shaping it, refining it, removing all the stuff that doesn't matter. And you're really getting down to the essence, boiling it down. But it takes time to draft. And so I think if you have that patience to realize your current perspective is a draft. And if you do a journaling session, the draft will get a little cleaner. If you have a conversation, the draft will get a little cleaner. If you go on a walk and think about it and give yourself some space, the draft will get a little cleaner. I think this is also another important part of psychological flexibility and also just emotional development, which is slowing things down. This is part of having an approach mindset. Is having an approach mindset doesn't mean you're always gunning forward. A lot of times it means that you can step back and you can think things through and you can be patient. I love the quote, infinite patience yields immediate results. Often if you're in an avoidance mindset, then you're actually interestingly going to be reactive. Because you're actually avoiding difficult emotions, you'll be more reactive because you don't want to sit with the emotions. The more emotionally developed you get, the more you'll sit. Just sit and be comfortable actually not taking an action. As weird as that sounds, rather than reactively sending that text or reactively shooting that email or reactively doing something, some avoidance technique, you actually can slow down, step back, and realize this can wait until tomorrow. And a big aspect of making big strides is actually sometimes slowing the situation down so that you can analyze it and think clearly rather than jumping into some terrible situation reactively because you don't want to deal with just sitting there. You don't want to deal with letting things digest or letting things ferment. Sometimes a week might feel like a lifetime. When you're moving forward and you're making big decisions, sometimes 3 or 4 days feels like an eternity. But if you can learn to pause, journal, walk, have conversations, iterate that draft, then sometimes a week may save you a year or a decade if you can be patient rather than jumping into the old cycles, rather than catching your past self and your past tendencies. One of my past tendencies is always to rush things. And I find that I have a hard time with white space, with just sitting quietly. There's a great book on the subject actually called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And he talks about how in today's world, we have increasing difficulty. He talks about with boredom. For me, I'm not that worried about boredom. For me, I'm more interested in actually dwelling, like sitting with time and just actually sitting and letting things ferment, like the fermenting process. And letting that process happen rather than rushing it. It kind of reminds me of just like the food industry right now, that with bread, we use like quick rise yeast. Whereas if back in the day, the bread took a day to ferment. Like you would let the sourdough ferment and it would be a lot healthier on the body, but it would also taste phenomenally better. We're into the quick rise. Sometimes you need to let the situation ferment. Sometimes you need to let your thinking ferment. But also it's important to recognize that how you'll see things tomorrow is different than how you'll see things today. For example, I'm in the midst of making some big decisions, and just last night I was with some friends, and their perspectives really gave me a new angle on my decision that I wasn't really thinking before. And this is why it's important to get other people's perspectives, but also people in different positions perspectives. And just to get all angles, ultimately, you still want to make the decision yourself. But you want to get as many angles on it as possible so that you're expanding your own worldview. And then ultimately, you can make a different or a more informed decision based on where you want to be in 10 years, not necessarily worrying about where things look in 10 days. If you start optimizing for where you'll be in 10 years, you'll start making much better decisions about where things are in 10 days. If you're only working on the short term, then you're working maybe, tactically, or you're working frenetically, but you have no idea where you're actually going. Whereas if you get clearer and clearer on the 10-year, this is why I like the quote, the bigger the vision, the better the decisions. Also, and I love this quote from Dan Sullivan, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. But also, and comes from research from Dr. Hal Hershfield and others who have been studying future self-psychology, that the quality of decisions you make here and now and the intentionality behind those decisions is based on your connection to your clarity of your future self. And so not only do you need to get clear on your future self, but then you got to think tactically and strategically about what are the best possible pathways to getting there, the best symbiotic or transformational relationships that will get you there. And truth is, your future self is going to be a different person than you. In order to get there, you're going to have to think differently than you think now and go through that transformation change process. I love the quote, what the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the butterfly calls the master. And so the whole idea is that from your current perspective, certain things might feel like the end of the world, but that's because it gets to the end of your worldview. And right now you just can't get beyond seeing things from the scope of your own perspective. Once you get beyond that, your future self is going to realize this is the best thing that happened to you, was altering that perspective. So breaking this down, to get immediate clarity, first off, view your decision-making, view your situation, view your future, and even view your past as a draft, that you're just putting a piece down, and every time you think about it, you're redrafting. Every time you journal, you're redrafting. Every time you go on a walk and you ponder, you're redrafting. Every time you get an external perspective, you're redrafting. And the goal is not to get stuck. The goal is actually to transform. This is how you get to higher levels of mental complexity and higher levels of psychological flexibility. Also taking the time sometimes with a draft to step back and let it ferment. Let it ferment. Part of being a good writer is knowing what to leave out. I love the quote, when in doubt, leave it out. And so there are certain aspects of this draft that you may be over-attached to. And this is also true of your past, that you got to let go of. When in doubt, leave it out. By taking it out, it's multiplication by subtraction. By taking it out, it just got 10 times better. This is what Michelangelo was talking about when he was building the David. He said, I remove everything that's not the David. With your current draft, there are aspects that you're attached to, things that you think are important that are actually holding it back. And part of the fermenting process is knowing what to let go of, what to remove. So I would say journaling, walking, important conversations, and then fermenting, letting things ferment. Higher emotional development means you can sit, you can slow things down. You don't need to avoid the difficult conversations or the difficult emotions and then reactively jump into some situation because emotionally you can't handle the fermenting process. And be open to quote unquote failure. And by failure, I mean just fast feedback loops. It's okay if you go into a situation and things don't go exactly how you planned. You can turn every experience in every situation into a great experience by learning more and more from it. There are no mistakes in life, only lessons. Lessons are repeated until they're learned. If you can evolve yourself and continue to learn new lessons and truly absorb them and think and improve how you think and improve how you see things, and if you're radically honest and open to feedback, then you will transform who you are. And there's a great quote from James Allen in the book As a Man Thinketh. He says, we do not attract what we want, we attract who we are. And as you are willing to get new angles, willing to absorb those, and willing to learn the lessons fast, there's a great book on this subject actually called Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. He talks about how most people, they don't really evolve much in their consciousness throughout their whole life. And the reason is because they are so stubborn about their views. They hold on to their views. They cling on to their views. They are unwilling to gain wisdom, which means you've got to really be honest about all the areas where you're ignorant, all the areas where you're bottlenecking growth, all the areas where you're attached to a perspective, to emotion, to one way of seeing things. It's just beautiful to realize your current self is as temporary and fleeting as the present moment. And that the goal is actually to change your perspective, to get a better view, to get a better angle, to clarify even more so that you can become more adaptive. And so the key is not actually to stay the same. The key is to evolve and to get better. And your current perspective is holding you back. And that's okay, because your future self in a week from now, in a month from now, in a year from now is going to see things very differently. And you can continuously reshape, evolve, and get better and better angles and perspectives and weed out the things that you're attached to that are holding you back. So I challenge you to get immediate clarity. I challenge you to do intense honesty journaling, and I challenge you to be open to intense feedback. And just because you get feedback doesn't mean you have to interpret it as true. It's just feedback coming from an alternative perspective, but you can use that to continually formulate better and better decisions. All right. Have an amazing day.